your wedding day. And yes, it's exactly as uncomfortable as it sounds. In the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't about love. It was about land, titles, livestock, and survival. Compatibility didn't matter. Chemistry was irrelevant. If you were noble, marriage was a political weapon. If you were a peasant, it was still a transaction, just with fewer witnesses and more goats. Romantic feelings existed, of course. People fell in love. They wrote poems, exchanged glances, dreamed. But love was never the priority. Survival was. Inheritance mattered. Social order mattered. Falling in love before marriage was risky. Falling in love outside of it was scandalous, unless you were a character in a tragic poem, in which case suffering was practically required. So, you waited. You obeyed. You tried not to fall for the miller's apprentice. Because in this world, love belonged to poets, but marriage belonged to parents, priests, and politics. Before courtship even began, there was a question everyone had to answer. What do you bring to the table? And if the answer was personality, you were already in trouble. Young men needed land, tools, livestock, or at least a roof that didn't leak. Love letters were charming, but nothing said husband material like 2 oxen and a house that could survive a mild storm. If your father had already promised the best coat to your brother, the priesthood suddenly looked very appealing. For women, marriage depended on a dowry, money, clothing, land, or an alarming number of geese. Wit didn't matter. Intelligence didn't matter. If your family couldn't pay, you waited. Possibly forever. And even when affection existed, a glance at the well, a shared moment at the market, it was meaningless unless the families approved. Romance without resources was fantasy. Among the nobility, things were worse. Marriage wasn't personal. It was geopolitical. A noble bride wasn't a person. She was a treaty, a border agreement with a pulse. Even peasants married for practical reasons. You didn't marry for butterflies. You married because your pig pen bordered someone else's wheat field. Passion was optional. Irrigation rights were not. Still, people tried. A carved spoon, a handful of berries, a slightly cracked mug offered with hope. Medieval flirting was subtle, cautious, and deeply economic. Love, if it came, was expected to arrive later, preferably after the first few winters. For nights, romance took a stranger form. Welcome to the world of courtly love. A noble performance where desire was theatrical, suffering was fashionable, and physical contact was strictly discouraged. A knight chose a lady, usually married, and adored her from afar. He wrote tortured poetry. He wore her colours at tournaments. He sighed dramatically and occasionally jousted someone who looked at her too long. The lady, meanwhile, remained distant, unattainable, and emotionally frozen. That was the point. Courtly love was longing without fulfilment, an elegant way to feel deeply without disrupting the social order. Actual intimacy was rare. A glance across a hall, a brushed finger during a feast. Anything more risked scandal. Affection, when expressed, travelled through tokens. A glove, a ribbon, a sleeve torn from a tunic. Everyone knew what it meant, and no one ever said it out loud. Plausible deniability was essential. For commoners, tokens were simpler. A carved trinket, a handkerchief, a practical gift made between chores. Still romantic, just with more calluses. Dating, if it can be called that, was heavily supervised. Mothers watched, priests monitored, cousins listened. Touching someone's hand without permission could be interpreted as a declaration of war. Letters were dangerous. Love letters were opened, read, censored. Metaphors were scrutinised. Too much passion, sense of freedom. Music, dancing, ale, eye contact without immediate judgment. Peasants impressed their crushes with feats of strength or coordinated dancing. Nobles offered poetry and shared food. Every smile was watched, every misstep remembered. Marriage followed quickly when approval came. It wasn't a vow under the stars. It was a contract. Dowries were negotiated, property discussed, livestock assigned. Love was optional. The merger was not. Divorce didn't exist in any recognisable form. Annulments required loopholes, luck, and paperwork. Most unhappy couples endured. They lived separately. They resented quietly. Affairs happened discreetly. Public scandal was worse than private misery. And yet, sometimes, love won. Rarely, dangerously, nobles eloped. These weren't romantic gestures. They were political sabotage. Families raged. Alliances collapsed. Wars nearly started. Some couples paid with exile. Others with blood. A few became leggy.